Alright boys, we're back at the paint station. Today we're going to be getting into gills, and then I'm going to get into how I do the sponge painting. I'm going to try and do the gills rather quickly so that I don't waste the entire video talking about gills, which is pretty not self-explanatory, I don't want to say, but once you know how to do it, it's not very difficult to do. So I'm going to do those quick, and then I'm going to show everybody how I sponge paint and what I do, because I know some people would think that all you do is grab a sponge, dip it in your paint, and put it on your bait, but that's not at all what I do. There's a lot to cutting the sponge, what texture you want the sponge to be, the consistency of your paint, and how you apply it that makes it either look like a 4-year-old sponge painted it and just smeared it everywhere, or look like art. So I'm going to get set up, get ready to go, and then we're going to jump into that. Alright, so first things first, you gotta have your bait prepped properly. There's gotta be, for epoxy and paint, a chemical adhesion going on. So fresh epoxy that hasn't been scuffed, paint won't stick to it well, although it will stick and you'll think it's going fine. And epoxy surely won't stick to it well. It'll separate, you'll have these bare spots on your bait, and even if it does stick all over the whole thing and look okay, it'll chip off. So I use red Scotch-Brite. You can get it off of Amazon. Scuff the whole thing. You have to have a chemical adhesion. So when you're doing epoxy, finish coats, base coats, whatever, if you're going to do more than one, you basically put a coat on and give it 2 hours to set up somewhat, but not be cured and not have the chemical adhesion be completed, and then do another coat on top of it, and then it can adhere together and bond together. Because if you just do, let's say I do a coat of epoxy on this, let it dry, don't scuff it, and then do another coat, it's not going to adhere to it right, and the first time it gets bit, it's going to start chipping. If I scuff it in between coats, then it will adhere, but again, that's a lot of work and a lot of crap in between, when you can just do more than one coat during the curing process so that they can adhere together. So make sure you prep everything well. Of course, after I do my 2 base coats of epoxy over this glitter bait, I scuff everything and then clean it down with Windex and whatnot and get all the dust and everything off of it so that we can begin painting. Alright, now I always trim my cup down just because it's easier to get the sponge in there. Trim down. So we'll trim it down to about halfway, if not maybe a little more. Put my paint in. We are going to do black over this guy. But before we do that, I'm going to show you all what I do with my sponges, because I feel like that's one of the most important parts. 2 most important parts are how you cut your sponge and how you dilute your paint for sponge painting. So the key thing I find, which I had a sponge that I've used for the last like 5 or 6 months, the only one that I cut down, a little piece smaller than this, and I lost it. So probably better for this video, I can show you all how I actually do it. You can cut it like this dry, but when you get a sponge wet, even with paint, it's going to expand. So what I like to do is wet it first with my spray bottle full of water. Get it nice and wet, let it expand, and then dry it off the majority with a paper towel or a rag, just so it's still moist, but it's not like dripping wet, obviously. Then I trim it flat, straight across, like so, nice and flat. And see how it's got the little bevel in the middle? I don't know if you can tell. Hold on, let me get another camera going. I trim it off flat as I can, but see, it's still not completely flat. So I'm going to go back and trim these edges off. You want it to be flat, because you want the middle 100% to hit the bait first. So basically as flat as you can get it, and if you have to have the edges rounded, so be it. That's better than having the edges touching the bait first. So I got it somewhat flat, and now I like to go in and just clip, make a couple snips here and there to break it apart and make it different. If you have to clean it up still, clean it up some more to make it look good. Sponge should be ready. I'm going to do another sponge just in case, or actually I'm not. I'm going to get another bait to show y'all what it looks like if you don't do the sponge properly. Now I always use Wicked Black or Wicked Jet Black for sponge painting. For some reason I found with a transparent or an opaque or even the pearlized, once it hits the bait sponge painting, for some reason it like socks it in. I don't know why it does that, but it does. So I only typically use Wicked Black or Wicked Jet Black for my sponge painting. I put some in there. And then I do dilute it a little bit. Not a lot, just a little bit. Couple drips. Let me mix that up. I'll try and show you all the consistency here. So I want it to be somewhat, I can't really show you in that one, but I want it to be somewhat thick, but not like just came out of the paint bottle thick, because that's just too thick. I want it to be a little bit more watery, but not super thin. Too thin, it'll just run and blow out. Too thick, it won't even set nicely or look nice on your bait when you're doing it. Alright, now first what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what it should look like when you have thinned your paint properly and cut your sponge properly. So we're going to go ahead, take our sponge that we've cut down. Still might even be, it dried out a little bit, so I'm going to moisten it up a little. Oh, that was Windex. Don't use Windex. So she's moist, she's soft, she's not stiff. Hands are dry. I usually get a good bit on the sponge, dab it off 3 or 4 times, and then I proceed to dab it. Now you don't want to drag it, you want to dab it so it looks nice and clean. If you drag it, it just looks like hell. This way I turn my sponge as I'm going, all different angles, so I'm not to lay the same pattern as I'm sponge painting. If I want it a bit thicker, I can go over the same area again. It's not going to hurt it at all. And I just lay it down nice. And obviously, depending on how you cut your sponge, you can get all different kinds of textures and looks and whatnot, and make the bait look how you want. But taking a sponge right out of the package and just sponge painting it on, I think it looks like hell. And it never comes out how you want it to look. Dry this off real quick. So, at least in my opinion, for what I think looks nice, this is how I like it to look. I'll try and get a better angle on it here. I like it to look nice and neat. Nice and clean. Not spotty or blown out or drug. Just nice and clean. That's when I dilute it right, cut my sponge right, make sure it's moist when I cut it and when I paint. Turns out how I like it. So now I'm going to show y'all what it looks like on this bait that I made a while back that didn't run how I liked. I'm going to show y'all what it looks like when you don't cut your sponge and with using either too thin or too thick of paint. Alright, so now I got a sponge cut and moist just how you want it, but I'm going to use paint that's been non-diluted and show y'all the difference between the two. So I get some on there. It's really thick. It doesn't even really want to get into the sponge. See how it's just globby? And it doesn't want to lay right on the sponge or on the bait. Like it just sticks and doesn't even lay right because it's too thick of a paint to put on there, and it doesn't look as good as it could. I mean, it doesn't look horrible, to be honest with you, but it doesn't look great. Some people do that. I mean, you can get a cool look with it not diluted how you'd like it to be, but I think it looks a whole lot better when you dilute it to the right amount. All right, boys. Now I have the sponge cleaned out, the one that we cut. Still cut nicely, exactly how we want it to make it work right. I'm gonna use paint that is overly diluted, too thin, and show y'all the difference between that, the thick paint, and how I like to do it. So I'm gonna get some of that on my sponge and then put that on. And that is just blatantly obvious. Look at the difference. That's the too thick paint. That's the too thin. See how it just blows out? It's just blown out and see-through, basically, transparent. It doesn't look nice. Let's see if I can get this thing to focus. All right, see, that's the too thick paint that we did not dilute at all. And that's the paint that's diluted too much. Here is the paint that we diluted properly. It just looks so much cleaner. It's not runny. It doesn't look like you drug it. It doesn't look even like sponge painting. It just looks dope. It looks sick. So that would be why I consider it important to dilute it properly. Now lastly, what we're gonna do is take a sponge, hasn't been cut, it's just a normal sponge. The same kind of sponge that I was using for the other applications, but hasn't been cut, hasn't been moistened. We're gonna use the perfectly diluted paint in the middle of the back here and show y'all how that looks compared to the other 3 times that we've done it differently. So we got some of our good paint on here. Does it look horrible? I'd say no, it doesn't look horrible. It looks okay. Some people would be accepting of that, but I don't think it looks great compared to when you just take the time to do it right. I think it looks a whole lot better, in my personal opinion. If you can see, I just think it looks better. And it didn't take that long. It was just a little bit of time to cut the sponge and dilute the paint properly. And obviously, I've done it a million times, so I'm used to it and I know exactly how I like it and how to do it. It's gonna take someone who's never done it a little bit more time to figure out. But as long as you follow those basics, never use a dry sponge. Cut the sponge flat. If you have to, around the edges. You don't want it higher on the edges than in the middle. Dilute your paint slightly. Not even as much as you would use it to spray your gun. Spray through your airbrush. You just want to dilute it a little bit so it's a little more runny than it comes out of the bottle. And don't drag. You want to just barely touch the bait, lift the sponge up, good to go. When you push really hard, that's when it blows out and looks like hell. If you drag it, obviously it looks like your 4-year-old did it, and that's not how you want it to look. So follow those basic steps, and I think you guys will be set. Thanks for watching, guys. If you did enjoy it, please slap that like button, subscribe if you're not already, and check out my fishing channel. I got a video coming out where me and Matt fished the figure 8 muskie tournament. We did pretty good, caught a bunch of fish. And then this coming Friday, I'm starting a series with him that I'll be editing and will be going up on his channel that we will be chasing the Maryland state record muskie. We currently know where 2 possible state records are. Actually, from the people I've been talking to, they're surely state records. It's just they've been caught and released and not documented as far as by Maryland, DC, and Argo. So we're going to be chasing those in probably an 8 to 10 series video, or however long it takes us to get one, honestly, starting this coming Friday. So subscribe to DJ Customs Fishing TV, subscribe to this channel, and stay tuned. Thanks for watching, guys. Peace.